Welcome to the David Spisak Show. I am absolutely delighted to have you here, and I'm equally delighted to introduce you to somebody who I had the pleasure of meeting during the recent NADA convention in Las Vegas, and I was immediately just kind of, there was this magnetic force. Don't get weird. There's this magnetic force because of what this gentleman has accomplished. Anytime I meet somebody who is able to achieve what many consider to be unimaginable, it fascinates me. And I just have to, I find myself needing to know more. I want to know them. I want to know more about them and kind of their journey. And so I'm excited to introduce you to Joel Bassam. Joel is the president of Easterns Automotive Group. It's based in the Mid-Atlantic region of the United States. I believe it's, and well, first I'll start off by saying officially, Joel, welcome to the program.
Yeah, happy to be here and an honor that you asked me to be a part of it.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. So I want to make sure I'm accurate here, Joel, because I haven't known you that long. We have a budding relationship here, but I don't know everything. And that's why I'm really interested in this conversation because I want to share it with people that are listening. Why? Sure. I don't know. I think that pre-owned is the key to, I always say failure, it turns out, is the key to success. Well, used cars, I believe, is the key to new car franchise dealer success. And if you happen to be an independent used car dealer out there, you know the drill. Used cars is where it's at. So, first of all, welcome. Secondly, could you just, I want to make sure I'm accurate. Are you based in Virginia?
Yeah, so our corporate headquarters, and I'm comfortable calling it our corporate campus, is out of Virginia, just outside of DC. We have a total of 9 retail points. Well, 10 if you include our single franchise point. And that is servicing both the DC and Baltimore DMAs. And our corporate campus is about 160,000 square feet and 20 acres. And that's actually is the hub that supports all of the spokes that are our retail locations that we call delivery centers.
Okay, and I just want to rewind the tape there because
Sure.
somebody, this is like the first notch of unimaginable,
Yeah.
right? It's for, I mean, most franchise dealers, Joel, you would agree, most franchise dealers are either suboptimal in used car sales performance,
Sure.
or they find it to be a bit of a struggle or a challenge, a lot of it because of used car procurement, managing inventory, getting the ideal inventory, pricing, recon, all of it.
Right.
It's hard to wrap, and whether you're a new car franchise dealer or even an independent that's successful, a little bit hard to wrap your brain around the headquarters. I'm going to say it again. I believe you said 20 acres and 160,000 square foot facility. Am I accurate there?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, it's a big car factory.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is, I don't know off the top of my head the size of a Costco, but that certainly sounds Costco-esque. In terms of the size, is it?
I think so. Yeah, it sounds about right. I guess I've never thought about it in comparison to that kind of space, but yeah, it's a fascinating kind of machine that we've built here, and it all kind of comes down to this sole focus of being the best used car dealer operations that we possibly can be, and we do that by basically eliminating what we call distractions, which are don't get me wrong, profit centers that we leave on the table. We don't do customer service until, again, within the last 6 months. We haven't been a franchise dealer for a long time because it is a completely different business in a lot of ways than used car exclusive selling. So at Easterns, it doesn't matter what you do here. We have about 300 employees. It doesn't matter if you're work in reception, you turn wrenches, you work in the parts department, you sell cars for a living because that's our only source of income. And everything that we've built within our processes is built around that kind of core idea of everything's in service to the customer and en road to a sale. So everything's about the efficiency.
So Joel, you are seemingly a little bit young to perhaps remember this in its heyday, but there was a movie that was really groundbreaking at its time. It was called The Sixth Sense. It was by a genius by the name of M. Night Shyamalan. And he created this movie where you did, unbeknownst to you, as you're watching this entire movie, literally on a giant screen before your eyes, you're watching it. And then at the very end, he puts this wicked twist on things that you said, where did that come from? And the end of the movie, he rewinds the tape and takes you through the exact things that you saw. And you're sitting there going, I I didn't even notice that. I didn't
Right.
notice that. I didn't notice that. If it's okay, I want to take a little bit of a cue from him, and I want to start out with where you are now, and I kind of want to rewind the tape a little bit for the benefit of everybody. But you have 9 locations,
Mm.
and each one of those 9 locations, you are competing head to head with well resources, well funded, established new car franchise dealers. True?
True. Yep.
Okay. Who's winning that battle on your 9 locations?
Well, I think it depends. It depends on also how you define winning. It's, I think we look at the market and our market share inside of that, and making sure our slice of the pie remains where we want it to be. And I also want to rewind a little bit to something you had mentioned before about used cars being the core of what success in the car business can be. I think one of the things that gets talked about often is SAR. I mean, it's SAR this, SAR that, and now it's EV this, EV that. And it's funny because it's just, when you consider the numbers of it, it's almost like you're missing the forest for the trees. We're talking about this number that, will be, somewhere between 14 and a half. And, at our best, we hit 17.6, I think 17.8. And, steadily behind the scenes, the little drummer boy that could, the engine that could, was used cars at 40, triple that number almost.
All the time.
Yeah. And all times. Right. And so we kind of focus on how to really maximize our reach inside of that. So at our current pace, we're competing with our franchise dealers. So there's different locations will have different direct competitors for that, hyper local market. And then on top of that, obviously we have the large players with CarMax and Carvana. Those are who I would consider more direct competition. And that's a competition that we fight for both the consumer and, up funnel when we're actually acquiring vehicles. Which is really the first level of competition to be a successful used car dealership. You sell a car when you buy a car. Everything that happens between those two things is really where you make your front end gross or don't make any. The decision to sell that car is made when you buy it. And if you do that wrong, nothing else really matters.
So if I can interject, just to provide context, because many of the people that listen are in the retail automotive space, right? Whether they're independent dealers or what, most of them are new car franchise dealers now. And certainly we've had people, from CarMax or Carvana and others that are affiliated directly or indirectly with our business listening as well. And I love them all. But for the purpose of this particular point, I'm talking in reference to the average new car franchise dealer. So I want to clarify, in your 9 stores, what is the average used car volume per month?
It'll vary based on somewhat the size, but somewhere around 100 used cars a month.
Okay, so there's my point. So my point is, the average, if you go by NADA statistics, the average new car franchise dealer is well below that number, right? So you are, in fact, I'm not saying, hey, like it's a competition. But you're winning. And the reason I want to bring that up, and the reason I preface this conversation by saying, God, that's seemingly unimaginable, is because it's interesting, the 1-to-1 used to new concept, the ratio of used to new 1-to-1 that people talk about and focus on to this day is decades old.
Yeah.
And I just want people to consider that for a second, because how many things in your life, whether it's, on your profession, whatever it is that you do for a living, that what the bar was 30 years ago has not moved. I don't know that you could find anything. And yet we continue to chase this 1-to-1 scenario. And I'll circle back to that in a minute. But what really is the icing on the cake, or the exclamation point here with regards to what you have accomplished, is that the new car franchise dealers, which nationally are not at a 1-to-1, they have the benefit of getting trade-ins off those new cars that they sell. You don't. Of course, you got the one Nissan store, but you really don't. The 8 stores don't. They have leasing, which means I'm going to get lease returns. I'm going to be able to buy cars off a lease return. You don't. They've got service loaners associated with the new car franchise. That is another source of used car inventory. And they have a service lane. So in a typical dealership, you would agree, if you're doing it right, you're going to get trade-ins. I got off-lease cars. I got service lane cars. I got ex-service loaner cars. And I got cars I buy off the curb. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Everything you're saying, right, is almost a mirror image of kind of the modern retailing conversation, where the reality is new cars should dominate it, right?
Yes,
Everything
that's
that
my
they've been
point.
building, yeah, new
And
cars should
yet,
absolutely crush independence when it comes to how they can get to market. They should be making more gross, not less gross. They have inherent advantages, but because it's just a different business. I mean, that's the reality of it. And used cars, just like new cars, it's the most complicated, simple business in the world. I think it's you buy low, you sell high, but to do it at scale and at volume and at efficiency, it takes a ton of focus and a ton of hyper awareness of every aspect of your process to make sure that you're not losing the little bit of competitive advantages that you have throughout that. And then on top of that, it's inherently a depreciating asset that you're probably paying interest on too. So you have this other factor of time and cost of time that's putting this other pressure on it. And this is where they kind of gets into this huge complicated factor of am I going to be a turn dealer? Am I going to be a gross dealer? Am I going to have a hard turn? Am I not going to have a hard turn? Am I price to market dealer? Am I value? Am I brand? I mean, there's different ways to approach this, and we've kind of found our niche. And just to clarify too, we have 9 used car stores and 1 franchise point. That franchise point, we actually partner with another dealer group called H. Gregg, phenomenal operators. They are used car first and have really exploded into the franchise space. They know Nissan better than almost anybody in the country and in North America because they're massive in Canada. And so,
yes.
even they have a different view of the used car space. I mean, they have a different approach when it comes to the way they sell used cars. So it's fascinating, and it's just it's a very complex space once you get into the nitty gritty of it.
I couldn't agree with you more. And man, I'm a big fan of H. Gregg and what they've done. Yeah, and again, Canada. No offense to the fine people of Canada or the people in the business in Canada, but it's been said for years that Canada is a number of years behind the United States dealers in a number of respects. Some of that is just for you got a huge percentage of the dealerships up there that are in incredibly small communities, right? And part of it is just you don't have the same franchise law system that we have here, and you have in some cases technology differences there. However, you've got phenomenal dealers up there like Open Road, and you've got Auto Canada, and you've got Dilawri, and you've got H. Gregg.
Yeah.
And some of those also Kaizen out of Alberta, Calgary, where they started saying, why can't we cross the border?
Yeah.
Why can't we take what we've learned and come down here? So Kaizen years ago started buying dealerships in the U.S. H. Gregg has done that.
Yeah,
And they've done a spectacular job, never losing the DNA, of what made H. Gregg H. Gregg.
Yeah.
But there's other in most markets, interestingly, where you are, Virginia, D.C., Northeast, out here in Portland, where I am, there's a dealer, DNC, which outsells every new car franchise dealer.
Yeah.
And same disadvantages, right? You have a dealer group in LA, 7 stores averaging 140 cars per store, getting cars that you're not supposed to be able to get. So that's where I think it's fascinating. And it's such a great lesson for our new car franchise dealers, as well as our independents that are listening, because it turns out, in fact, that if something's unimaginable, it's just unimaginable to you, right? And you got to be able to imagine it and kind of see it before you can go after it. So I want to kind of rewind the clock and kind of get into rewind the film a little bit, like I said, and get into your DNA.
Yeah.
Where did you get your start in the independent used car business? And what was, in your mind, the defining moment that allowed you to be where you're sitting today?
Well, I mean, short answer or long answer?
Give it to me.
Okay. So long
There's
answer.
the power of editing, my friend.
I got you. Yeah. Long answer is, I'm second generation. I've got my PhD. My papa had a dealership. My father, I started working here when I was 12, and my father started this company in 1988. He, long story short, was waiting tables and went with his father to buy his father needed a new car. went to the Salvation Army. They were selling running cars for $50. And he bought one, sold it to his coworker for 300. And he was like, man, this is better than tip money. Went back, bought, 5 more, sold them, went back, bought 20 more, got in trouble for driving cars with improper tags. And then one of his clients at his bar, his regular, was a dealer. And he said, oh, here's where you go to get a dealer license. So within, 2 weeks of selling his first car, he became a dealer. And then
That's crazy. What an awesome, isn't that what an awesome story that is?
Yeah.
That's where this monster 160,000 square foot, 20-acre facility came from somebody going, this is not a bad deal.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
that was in the 80s, 88, did you say?
Yeah, 80. Well, this was before the dealer license. This would have been mid 80s.
Okay, mid 80s.
Became a dealer, and then basically learned then it got harder because now, he had to follow the rules basically. So, he kept waiting tables and was, wholesaling on the side, but he learned the business backwards from a wholesaling perspective. So, he bought a lot, and that was really meant to be a wholesale lot that was just storing cars. And he was, basically working with other dealers within the market saying, all right, I will acquire your vehicles for you. I get the front, you keep the back. That's how it works. I'll front you the car, right? You cut me the check for the difference. And that was very successful for him. Then he kept having customers kind of wander onto his lot, and, a light went off and said, there's something that's in common with all his customers. And there's a subprime customer that's just being treated very, very poorly in the market. What if we just treat them well and sell them the same quality vehicle, which even today, by the way, is still something that, I struggle with as kind of an advocate for, is there isn't a distinction between a subprime and prime process. That's on you. That's your kind of, what you're bringing to the table, your own. I'm trying to think of a word that isn't kind of negative. Your own issues you're bringing to the table there. It's the same customer. It's the same level of affordability and the same need for a vehicle. You shouldn't merchandise differently. You shouldn't advertise necessarily differently.
And frankly, I would assert that they have a huge potential to be, frankly, a more loyal client over a longer period of time.
Yes.
Is that true?
100%. Yeah, because so customers are getting turned away. You get laughed out of a showroom if you have a below 600 beacon, right? And the reality is that those are customers who need a car. We'll sell.
I've never understood that, Joel.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
I've never in my dealerships. I think that you'll like this. In my dealerships, if somebody found that somebody had a low score, FICO score, instead of doing what oftentimes happens too often, which is they get treated like, oh God, did you know your credit score? Yeah, there's nobody that has credit problems that doesn't know they have credit problems, right?
Not today.
Keen sense of the obvious.
Right.
So, but that what oftentimes happens, they instantly become a pariah, right?
Yeah.
They become a second-class citizen, and oftentimes in dealerships, they do a really outstanding job of doing the wrong thing, which is making them feel terrible for their circumstances, instead of considering the fact that many of these folks that find themselves in these situations have been in extraordinary circumstances. Maybe, just maybe, they've got a kid who had extraordinary medical expenses. You'd see the Ronald McDonald House, by the way, just to get tangential, the Ronald McDonald House and places like that, Shriners, they exist to allow people to get medical care for their families without worrying about having to mortgage their house or doing those things. The Ronald McDonald House, oftentimes the people that are there with their kids have literally spent every single dime. When I volunteered there, they said they didn't even have the money to get the airplane ticket or the taxi or Uber to get to Ronald McDonald House. That's provided for them. So you don't know what people have gone through. And our approach instead was, when we found out that was the case, you actually got elevated, right? We went the other way. Yeah. Hey, I know that this is probably how you've been dealt with before. Come in here. We brought them to the nice space, sat them down, and gave them that one-on-one. It sounds like that is part of your DNA.
100%. Yeah, that's exactly right.
I love that.
This is the early 80s or early 90s, late 80s. The slogan was, where your job is your credit. That's a trademark slogan that we own, that we still use. It really, we had one lot for a long time, just a good old fashioned traditional independent lot, did really well. We're the #1 CAC dealer in the region for a while. And then, realized that we needed a second location. I'm a little kid at this point, so I'm not working at the dealership, but needed a second location and then a third. We broke into Maryland in the early 2000s. Things really went crazy for us when we came up with our jingle, which if you're from this market, it's kind of an, infamous or famous jingle. It's actually in the expansion pack for Cards Against Humanity in DC. So we're really proud of it. We still air it to this day. Your listeners can go look it up and have that earworm implanted for a while. And then 2008 happened. At the time, we had 17 locations, and we had multiple recon centers, 17 locations, multiple buyers. We had lots of little lots as opposed to what we have today, which are 9 very large lots. And 2008, we shrank back down to 5, just our biggest stores. And since then, we had been steadily growing until 2020 at 10% sales volume year over year, including maintaining a drop to the bottom line of over 5%, with no absorption. That's just through the used car sales. So we continue to grow and grow and grow. We were adding 1 to 2 stores a year. 2020 happens. And, throughout these last few years, all of the advantages you brought up of why franchise dealers should be the best used car operators were things that we had no access to. And all of our advantages for being really good at the other side of the business effectively eroded and didn't exist, let alone access. There weren't cars. If Manheim was running 40,000 cars in a week in PA, they're running 6,000 cars. So it doesn't matter how sharp of a buy you are. The pie is shrunk to a point where you can't fill your lots. And on top of that, the cars aren't affordable. So we have almost felt like targeted, and I don't mean that in any specific way, when it came to independents were the hardest thing to get through these last few years. We're through it. And luckily it's mostly because my father had always thought that there's something coming, like we were due a cycle. And so we had, really been, lucky enough to have a bunch of cash stored, and we had a pile of money to basically burn over the last few years. And now the roles are reversed. Like, floor plans are coming to us and approaching us and back again. And our lending is getting softer and lending is getting better. And we're getting more and more exciting things with different pilots with different banks. It really feels like the tables have turned and we're back into growth mode. That's why we added 2 locations in the last 6 months, and we're going to hope.
So this continues to be such a fascinating story and such a, they always say success leaves clues. And I was telling somebody yesterday, I said, isn't it interesting? Nobody's going to go to Amazon to look for a book on the about somebody who was handed everything in life and somehow made it, when everything went right all the time. Who cares? Yeah, no kidding. You should have. People love a comeback story. People love resiliency. People love relentlessness. People love the tenacity and the grind and the hustle and how somebody came back. And, Carvana, just to give them credit, I posted a few times on LinkedIn over a period of time. This is a company was not doing things well and was not experiencing a great outcome as a result, and did not seem at the time to be a viable business, honestly, long term. And they went from $360, fell down to $4 or $5, and seemed to be dead. They needed to raise money. They needed to resituate debt. They had problems and sold off part of their portfolio to I believe it was to Ally. But you look at them now, and everybody's talking about NVIDIA being up 250% over the last year. Carvana's up 750%.
Right.
Hard decisions, tough decisions, cut employees, reinvented their processes, took a hard look at the way they were structured. Sure. And lo and behold, you've got a company with a completely different outcome. You guys are very much mirror that. I'm very curious. You came in, you mentioned at the age of 12, the ripe old age of 12. And what year was that, Joel, roughly?
I am 33. So
21 years ago.
Yeah. 21 years ago. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I've been here for a minute.
Okay. So just past the year 2000. Yeah. So by this time, your dad had been in business for the better part of, I don't want this to sound bad legally, but legally been in business for roughly 12, 13, 14 years. Right. How long did your dad stay involved principally in the business
He's still
before.
he bought cars this morning. What are you talking about?
You're
every day.
kidding.
He
He's
clocks in
still
every day.
deep in it. Oh
What are
my
you talking?
God.
Yeah, he's still our CEO. He handles all of our growth acquisitions. Still buys our cars.
Oh my God. Oh my
relationships.
God.
He's
That's
incredibly
great.
involved.
May I
I do
ask how
I
old
do all the
Pops
boring
is
stuff
now?
he doesn't want to do. He's 57.
57. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's very, very cool. So you're talking about that this guy, has been nearly 30 years at this, and he made this bold move
Mhm.
and had this epiphany literally in his mid-20s.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
It was wild.
That's wild. That's absolutely wild. All right. So
And
let's
so there was two things I wanted to add too. So one of the key things of our growth that I didn't mention was we were a pure subprime player prior to 2013. We were like only focused on
like
marketing.
a buy here, pay here, make payments
Yeah, we
every
didn't
week
hold
kind
any
of place?
paper,
Okay.
but it was everything was the jingle where your job's your credit. We actually did some pretty interesting and creative stuff when it came to marketing where, there was a Easterns Automotive Group magazine. Remember when Auto Trader was a magazine?
Yeah.
So in the DC market, there were the three bins. There was cars.com, there was Auto Trader, and then there was another one called Auto Selector, which was just our own magazine.
Wow.
So they, my father and my cousin at the time actually did the math and figured that they could print their own magazine for less than it costs to be in those other ones. So they actually had their own magazine at all the same stops. And the change that we made in the kind of late, I guess you call it the aughts, right? The 2010, 2013, we just made a decision to say, how do we get more prime business? How do we get a more full spectrum view of consumers? And the only thing we did, David, was price our cars competitively. That was it. That's the one thing that we changed. We had very expensive cars, and if you're a deep subprime player, you know that's to cover bank fees, because you can't charge your customer more. You can only charge them less. So you would charge more, and then you would actually almost always write the car prices down. So we actually ran the numbers on that before we switched to a one price model in 2018, and found that we were never writing cars up. And statistically speaking, we were writing cars down on the majority of our cars on the sales price. And so, we had that approach. We made that switch, and lo and behold, we went from 300 or 400 cars a month with 6 locations to 600-700 cars a month just by making that switch. No increase in staff because, if you can do subprime deals, prime deals are the nothing. I mean, you're not
piece of cake. Oh my God.
Yeah. In and out,
so much easier.
high NPS scores, 30-minute transactions, no problem. And that's been a key kind of focus of our growth over the last few years, is kind of being everything to everyone. So we still have where your job's your credit, but our new slogan is any car, any way for everyone. And that applies to a couple of key things. It's, any car, meaning we have a huge selection of inventory, that every car is available to every customer at every store. We're a single entity, so there is no ownership of vehicles at every location that we have. It's Easterns on those cars. The stores do not. And a majority of our cars sold are actually come from another store. And we don't charge customers for that privilege, that need. It's if you set an appointment, we move it for you. Just end of story.
So one thing I wanted to jump in on, though, is I think is a very critical piece for people to listen to. When you had that monstrous growth, when you had that epiphany, which was based on, oh, by the way, I got to get this in, was based on data. But wasn't based on gut. It wasn't based on, it was based on data, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you made a data centric, you made a data focused decision that benefited you massively. So, one of the things that seems to be a hindrance in many, many dealers across the country, new car dealers, especially that are in the used car business, is they're so programmed. We've been programmed for decades to maximize gross. Yeah, we get it. We're supposed to make money. We get it. But when it comes to your used car inventory, having the approach and the pricing methodology that is based on maximizing gross versus maximizing turn has been deadly. You're right? Because when you try to maximize gross, what's that doing? Well, the sales manager, they're marking up the car to make a big hit, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. Somebody brings in a write-up this week. It's for a $600, $800 gross profit. What does that sales manager do more times than not? Think, I'm going to pass. I'm going to pass. I'm going to wait for better deal. Better deal never happens. Wow. Next thing you know, it's 35, 45 days later. The car's not worth what it was worth. They end up taking a hit, oftentimes less money than they would have got to begin with. And they could have turned that capital again in 30 days and doubled their money. So Would you say from your perspective that that is one of, you mentioned earlier, hey, you sell the car when you buy the car. That's key, everybody. But is a second one the fact that your pricing methodology is critical?
Well, yes and no. It is and it isn't. It depends if that's your play. So, Easterns is a brand we overspent on marketing to maintain front end gross because we have built a brand that wins us ties. So it depends if you're willing to make that kind of investment in long term play. So we're not a turn focused dealership. Don't get me wrong. We don't have a hard turn. We like profit too much. So that opportunity for customer loyalty and back end is too great for us to pass up. So that being said, we'll never turn away a deal. I mean, we'll take it. We always say car approvals are precious, cars are replaceable. So it's the consumer's the willing to buy this car, sell them the car. I mean, Jesus, like you shouldn't have to have that conversation. Everything you just said sounds absolutely horrifying to me. So with that scenario you played out, but
yeah,
we've also but we built a system that's eliminated all that. So a little bit about the way that works for us is we have, out of this corporate campus, we have an inventory team. And that inventory team is the people who buy the cars, price the cars, book the cars in, book the cars out, merchandise the vehicles. And all this happens the day of the purchase, by the way. So at Easterns, we buy a car from Manheim, most likely, and potentially Odessa, or, maybe a direct relationship with another listing, a remarketer. And that car will be on the website within an hour. It'll be booked out in an ADA, KBB, Black Book, and locked in. And the stores actually have no control or access to any of that information.
So you have a really strict segregation of duties here. So this is important. And I mean, you're saying so many things that are not necessarily, embedded in the average store. So excuse me for rewinding, but so there's two approaches. There's two ways that somebody can win. Either you're going to make a pretty significant long-term investment in your branding, in who you are and the experience you create, and be unapologetic for price, right? Maximize the value that you're supplying to somebody, and that maximizes gross. Or the other option is you're going to be a low-cost provider, hyper competitive in the marketplace, and be very focused on turning that capital 12, 15, 18 times a year or more. And that allows you to make the same level of profitability, but you're doing it on the backside, so to speak. Is that fair?
Yeah. Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And you're open. You're equal opportunity. Right?
Yeah. I'm not going to take no. I mean, I'm not going to sell used cars like new cars. That's a threshold that we won't get to. When I'm saying I'm only kind of clarifying the fact that we're not a super focused on low price to market exclusively. We want to be competitive in the market. Don't get me wrong. And I hosted a dealer visit on Monday, and I'll throw this out there to your listeners. We're very open to dealer visits. There's nothing that we do that's actually, unique. It's just done at scale and really efficiently. So I'm always open to hosting dealers and showing them around.
Thank you. I appreciate you doing that. And anybody that doesn't take advantage of that, I think is not super interested in being in the used car business.
But yeah, it's so because of all those inherent controls, and because there's no ownership of the inventory at the store level, like my GMs aren't paid on the P&L. We don't have 10/10 dealership GMs. Like we don't produce financials per store. There's no point to doing that for us. We run a single instance of, in our case, we use Roadsters, our modern retailing, I guess is the current vernacular. Single instance of Roadster, single website, single CRM, single DMS with 9 instances of F&I office underneath it. But the centralization of everything enables us to do things that other dealerships really struggle with. So
it eliminates the silos. The territorial
silos a lot. Yeah. And on top of that, it also makes us more efficient with both at time and money at the same time. So here's an example that we use. Everyone who gets hired, for instance, I give them a tour of our entire process. I go through our entire campus and why we make decisions, how we make decisions. That way, when they're sitting across from a customer, they can really explain this stuff in detail. But a good example of that is, every one of your franchise dealers listening probably has a tag and title department, or it's somebody's full-time or part-time job at least. And they might have 1 or 2 people per store. So in our case, that would be, let's call it 18 individual people who handle tags and titles for the company, for each store, because each store is the company within the company, even if they're part of a dealer group.
Mhm.
For us, we have a team of 5 that handles all of the titles, and they work out of this office. And they're
Centralized.
centralized. And the people who do that used to work for MBAs or DMVs.
Yeah.
Same thing, and just apply that to every single department that works in the back house.
You are very CarMax or Carvana
100%.
in terms of everything that you're saying, where you've got the segregation of duties, where you have the highly specialized knowledge, where you have the high degree of centralization, maximum efficiency, cost efficiencies. You don't have people tied to a traditional P&L. You have kind of an all for one for all, where the inventory belongs to the organization. It really is remarkable what you and what your father, what he started, obvious, and what you continue to help grow in this organization. I mean, that's a massive transformation from a traditional dealership, even for a store, a group that may have 10, 15, 20 stores.
They don't leverage their size.
They don't leverage their size.
Yeah.
Yes. It's crazy.
Why do you have, that 15 store group? They have 15 floor plan relationships. They might have 15 buyers who are competing. They might be bidding against each other.
I was just saying, Joel, it's crazy. I was just saying, one of the pain points for dealerships today is, the fastest growing line on the financial statement has been data processing, right? With this proliferation of solutions. And hey, I'm guilty. I've built some of them, but mine work. Anyways, there's some really good ones out there that work. We'll get into that for a minute, but dealers have gotten to the point, even when it's a great solution, they've kind of hit this tipping point where they don't necessarily want to write 15 checks for 15 solutions, deal with 15 support teams, 15 training teams. The inefficiency of that is a challenge. And at this point, we don't have a solution for that, but hopefully we're moving towards that. Companies like Techion certainly are breaking through that. But in your case, you've actually figured that out, because you have one instance of your DMS, one instance of Roadster, one instance of those solutions, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, and we've worked around their shortcomings with staffing, but because they aren't built for what we do, we kind of square peg round hold them into functioning on the way that we want them to. And the specifics of how we make like Roadster work, for instance, it's like kind of a podcast within itself, but we're good at it. About 30% of our deals that we retail at our store level are completed orders in Roadster, which is
that's great.
A number that I have not heard from anyone else. And it's because we treat our website like a dealership. You foursquare in a digital space, stop waiting. The whole concept of being, I can't even tell you how many dealers say, well, what happens when you send them a high interest rate, or, are they going to select products? Like, the answer is yes, like they do. And they self-select products because I have the data and I'll show it to them. And I'll share my GA4 access, or at least my data studio view, with any dealers who don't believe me. Customers on our website are selecting 3.5 products per vehicle. And
the PBR, the F&I PBR over 1,000.
100%. I mean,
$100. Yeah.
That's low for us, but yeah, I understand your point.
Yeah.
But the reality is that you just need to focus on solving the problem for the customer first and figuring everything else out later. I mean, I think dealers tend to work backwards from that. So,
I'm smiling because during the pandemic, everybody got super interested and excited and focused on digital retailing, right? And anybody that knows me has heard me rant a bit, friendly rant, about how preposterous it is to refer to it as digital retailing, because digital retailing would imply digital online retailing. I can acquire something. And it turns out that when I go to digital retailing in the vast majority of dealerships, I can't retail, and I can't retail anything. I could digitally shop, I could digitally select, I could digitally search. But, it's the equivalent of going to Amazon, I've said, and searching for a book, selecting a book, buying the book, and then a screen comes up that says, just come down to the closest bookstore and pick up your book. That's not digital retailing.
Yeah. I would say it wouldn't even be that far, because most of them couldn't accept payments, but yeah.
Yeah. And so in your case, most dealers would tell you, as soon as things opened up again, towards the end of the pandemic, and people started coming back in, they said, I told you people don't want to buy online. And I said, They just don't want to buy online with the solution you're giving them
Right.
right now. So it's like if I go onto Instacart and I have to go down and pick up my groceries, I will not use Instacart,
Yeah.
right?
Or
So
you like,
that's
let's talk that out further. I mean, it would also be the shopping experience would be more akin to you add a bunch of stuff to your Instacart, and then you say, okay, I'm willing to pay this, and they say, okay, well, come see us, and then you get there and the numbers different. Half the products that you ordered don't actually exist. And then on top of that, you're going to have to sign
well
the
said.
contract in a back F&I office, and I'm going to tell you how much all the fruit that you just bought stinks. Right? So
It's incredibly well put. So I could add. So this is crazy. So 30% of your deals essentially are happening online because you've actually created a scenario where you can modern retail using, in this case, Roadster's environment. But keep in mind, everybody, he didn't take it out of the box, just add water and say, okay, this should work. No. They took it out of the box and said, there's some challenges here. Great product, but there's challenges. And we have to figure out underneath the covers. And by the way, that's again very Carvana-esque to me, because Carvana was the first one that said, hey, let's do this online. And it wasn't like Carvana had some magical digital system that allowed them to seamlessly do that. They had a lot of people behind the scenes or things they had to duct tape and Band-Aid to create this seamless experience for the customer. All they did is they took the friction and pain point away from the customer, and it was incumbent that they put it on them to figure it out. That's what you did, right?
100%. That's exactly the way that I always
Very
explain
cool.
it too. Is the reality is that, so there's a lot I can say about this. So one thing about Carvana that I always say is Carvana does what has always done what dealerships do really poorly, really well, but they've also done what dealerships do really well, really poorly. And I think that's what they're on the road to solving, the latter half.
Yeah,
So,
that's very well said. By the way, Brian Kramer, and Brian, I met when Brian was the dealer general manager for Germain down in Naples, and he was just instantly, I could recognize him, kind of like you, that, okay, I got to know this guy. He's a cut above. He's different. He thinks differently. And one of the things I'll never forget when he was there is he relentlessly pursued this end-to-end seamless transaction, figuring out, I don't care what it's going to take, what the cost reasonably, but I am going to eliminate the friction points, for the online shopping experience for the clients. And I'm going to take these on our side. And he likewise saw this very significant improvement. And I'll never forget, one of the things he said is, David, we use the online trade appraisal to do the appraisal. What it says is what it is. And he says, we may lose from time to time, but over the course of the year, we end up with a far better scenario for our customers. We take in way more cars. And frankly, when you shake it all out, we win. You know why? Because people have been using Viato for probably the better part of 2 decades. And my data has shown religiously, consistently, Joel, that when a human attempts to interject their gut into an algorithmic superior product, right, that's been programmatically created, they end up guessing wrong. They're the equivalent of day traders.
Sure.
And day traders don't win. Warren Buffett wins, right? So you do the same thing, don't you, in terms of online appraisals?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, and you take what you get, and it depends on what you're focused.
As long as the car is described.
You're trying to sell cars, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about here. Like, it's the old disc kind of idea. Like, and if you do modern retailing right, it sells you more cars. That's what it boils down to. So, as far as like the process and how we use it and how we leverage it, I think you hit the nail on the head. We're taking on the friction. I've never heard it explained so eloquently, so I appreciate that. I'm going to steal that.
Thank you.
But the reality is, like, what we've done is make the perception of the deal feel seamless to the consumer. The reality is, I just put an F&I office in a BDC. I mean, that's what it more or less boils down to, right? They take these customers in, and the difference between, a side note is, I'd say that the focus on auto decisioning, I think, is kind of missing the forest for the trees when it comes to digital retailing, because those tools still, most of them don't have a road to contracting. So I'll throw that out there, by the way.
I agree. Right.
But the reality is, like for us, like we receive these customers that come into our systems. It could be from a trade appraisal first. It could be from a finance application without a VIN. It could be from a pencil deal. It could be from a VIN specific finance application or a soft pull, whatever. Doesn't matter to me, right? Then you just start Foursquaring in a digital space and you send them real numbers. I mean, that's what it boils down to. Not you're going to start with an estimate, of course, and you're going to sharpen those estimates moving forward, but there's no reason to not immediately start engaging because the consumer has raised their hand and say, I'm willing to engage with these tools. I'm not hiding behind a CTA that's misleading. I want to actually buy this car from you and I want to find out what my numbers is. The car business is one of the weirdest businesses in the world where you say, I want to buy this car and you say, great, you're going to find out what it costs later. Like that's such a bizarre thing. And I think just eliminating that as much as you can for a customer, especially as the younger generation gets older and they get into this buying cycle, they just want to know it from home. And like the whole reason that we do all this stuff, frankly, is because I know completed orders show at a 90% rate. I mean, it's a math problem, right? I'm not, a preacher who believes in digital retailing, this is going to change the world. Like, I don't care. Like they show a higher rate. That's what matters. I sell more cars off these leads than I do off of someone who isn't qualified. Yeah. And on top of that, our biggest conquest area is an existing customer lead that we then encourage via automated messaging to then engage with the shopping tool. So I've already set an appointment for David, who's coming in next Thursday. In the meantime, would you like to save time? That's it.
Yeah. You know what's crazy about this? I'm so sorry. I got to stop you because at times you're throwing out things that have such a massive value and impact. And it's so organic. It's so inherent, for your thinking and the way you do things, but it's so foreign. It's so counterintuitive to the majority of the industry, I think. And so I want to stop there because isn't it crazy? I was explaining to my wife this morning, I said, I'm a data freak, right? I just study data. I've studied data for longer than anybody has in operational data. I got hooked on it in the early 90s. I applied it to my store. We went from making $1 million a year to $29 million a year. That's interesting, right? On a 4-acre lot. And we were leveraging data more than a decade before anybody did. And so I still do this. And so I do it for clients across the country. And one thing I notice is fascinating. While everybody wants to be number one, everybody wants to be the best, everybody aspires to be the Michael Jordan or Kobe or Tiger of the car business. The reality is 100% of dealers in America have things that they are below average. 100%. 100%.
Yes.
And when I look at data, NCM data, benchmark data that we have access to because of one of the tools that I built, it's fascinating. Most dealers are leaving between $1 million, $2 million or more in net profit. They're leaving more on the table by being below average on 35 profit driving metrics than they actually made last year. Sure. And so it turns out, I said, I was telling my wife that I said, when people get up in the morning, instead of thinking, hey, I'm going to go in and be Superman, I don't know, instead of grabbing that spandex blue shirt that's got the big S on it, why don't you grab the blue one that has a big A on it and say, today I'm going to be average. Yeah. Because if I could just be average, I'm going to double what we made last year. That's the right. Things that you're sharing are mind-blowing. Here's the connection. The connection is, wait a minute. It turns out Foursquare, what year is this? What is this guy talking about, Foursquare? It turns out that you don't have to turn your world upside down. You just have to make their world better. And so can you imagine, everybody, the Foursquare that everybody said, I don't want, and we don't like the experience. But if you let me do it in my car, in my office while I'm getting paid, or in my home, it's great. I don't mind it at all. It's actually fantastic. So I think that's such a huge point that maybe we've just been missing on in a big way in this business. I've never heard it put that way. Everybody's tried to reinvent every aspect of the thing, and all people want to do is the easy button. Make it easier for me.
I just want to buy a car. I mean, you're going to ask him anyway.
Crazy. Thank you for that.
I don't like, that's the, like, you're going to ask them, you need a finance application to sell a car. Right?
That's crazy. That's crazy. So
before they get in the showroom, if they have a trade, you're going to need to appraise that trade. Why not ask them before they get the showroom? If you already have a finance application and Maybe you've already pushed it to a dealer track or a Route 1 and you know you have conditional approvals based on stip requests. Why not ask them before they get in the showroom? It's just, they're going to do it anyway. And by making that an asynchronous experience for the consumer, in which they're doing it at their leisure as opposed to your demands in a linear fashion, it becomes this experience that's like, hey, this is just like when I purchase something from Apple, or just like when I purchase something from
automatically superior.
I was like, of course, like Apple doesn't wait till you get somewhere to then ask you for something. They're going to say, hey, like, just so you know, I'm going to need this. You can upload it now or bring it later. Just letting you know, here's a portal where you can upload it. It's safe and easy. It's inside of an application environment that you can trust. But I'm not going to force you to do it. And that's another big reason why, frankly, we've been stuck with Roadster for a long time is, to my knowledge, and I try to educate myself as much as possible on what's in the space. It's the best system when it comes to a non-linear experience, which is a majority of consumers. The other thing is a majority of consumers aren't going to do the whole thing. Like,
yeah, my take personally is when you look at the online aspect of this, Roadster still has superiority, in my humble opinion. When you look at offline in the dealership, there's products like Upstart that have superiority. Roadster is not great in the dealership. Right. They're great online. Upstart, in my opinion, is not as good as Roadster online, but they're better in the store. And nobody has really figured that out. Techion is probably, again, the one that's closest to, they just launched this Sales Concierge Pro, which allows somebody to be in the dealership. It not only allows easy for the customer, but this is really mind-blowing. This is easy. They said, well, shouldn't we also make it easy for the salesperson? So if the salesperson happens to be in their car off and they're interacting with a customer, they could just push a button and just like a FaceTime be on the screen. And then what if the customer says, yeah, but what can I get for an interest rate? Oh, give me a second. Boom. All of a sudden the F&I manager pops in, answers the question, they disappear. The used car manager pops in, they disappear. So, we are getting to that point slowly but surely. But I've got two questions as we careen towards the top of the hour. One of them is, there's the old saying, nobody does it alone, right? Not even the great Elon Musk at $250 billion net worth does it alone. And so you had mentioned Roadster is one of those applications, not perfect, but at this point, it's as close to perfect for you as you're going to get. Yeah. I met you at NADA at the Cars Commerce booth, and we just happened to be on a panel. I was moderating a panel, and I had the pleasure of talking to you and Brian Kramer. Brian's level of enthusiasm and passion and knowledge, he's just all in all day, every day when it comes to used cars. I'm just curious, when you look at Cars Commerce and your relationship with using their tools, what role does that play? Why is it impactful for you?
I mean, Cars Commerce specifically, the panel we spoke on was about the value that AccuTrade can bring to any used car department. I think, to their credit, and I've had this conversation with them and their product lead, and they admit this themselves. I think what their issue when they went to market the first time with AccuTrade was the common comparison was to products that actually are completely different. Things like KBB ICO and things like OfferUp, they have value. Don't get me wrong; those are specific use cases, but they aren't what AccuTrade is. Mm-hmm. AccuTrade is, you turn your wholesale manager, your used car manager, your salesperson potentially, your GM, all of those individuals have different levels of experience when it comes to the wholesale market. Imagine if all of them were Bob Hollinshead. I mean, that's what it boils down to.
It's crazy. It's AI,
and that's what the tool does.
It really is Bob Hollinshead's AI, right?
Right. It's literally. I mean, that should be enough to sell anyone who buys and sells used cars. There really shouldn't. And that's all it took for us, by the way, is like Alex, who happens to be your friend, Alex Better, and he said, "This is Bob's tool," and that was basically the end of the demo. It was this is Bob's tool, great, and we can have it.
Guy wholesales, for those people that don't know, Joel, share. Bob happens to wholesale more cars than companies do, right? Guy knows a little bit about used cars.
Yeah, I mean, because it's just a phenomenally accurate tool, easy to use, intuitive. It's something you can do with a consumer. You can do it in a virtual environment, and it's accurate. I mean, that's what it boils down to. It's not designed to create or generate more wholesale profit. It is designed to give you accurate numbers on a trade, which if you're in the business of selling cars first, that should be the most important thing. You're not trying to, a wholesale profit to me is means I left deals on the table.
Yeah, that's right.
Uh, so
And
it's
isn't it fair to say that, frankly, if you have that tool, instead of having one or two used car buyers the way we have done in the past, imagine having 100 employees. All of them had access to the mobile app with AccuTrade. And if they happen to run into a friend tonight at dinner who said, man, I'm thinking about selling my car, they go, well, let me pull that up. They literally could provide an accurate appraisal. Anybody in your store could provide an accurate appraisal to any human on site within probably 2 minutes, right?
Yeah.
That's
I mean, I don't know if
insane.
they'd have the OBD plug with them, but yeah, I totally.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. All right.
It'd be
So
weird if you were like at the gym and you had that on you. You're like, oh yeah, I got this just in case.
yeah, I just happen to have it in my back
Yeah.
pocket. Is that your wallet? No, it's my
No,
OBD.
it's my OBD.
Yeah, so that's super interesting. So as you move forward into 2024, first of all, I guess one quick question is your view of the used car market, your outlook for the used car market in 2024, better than last year, about the same, or maybe a little tougher than last year?
Better than last year, just because
I agree.
affordability is coming back, at least in specific segments. So, used car incentives, our new car incentives help used car dealers. I mean, that's in the short term, it hurts. Don't get me wrong, but long term, it's a good thing. We need new cars to get cheaper. That makes used cars cheaper. That was the biggest difference between what 2020 and 2020 was for a used car dealer versus what 2008 was. 2008 happened. You had customers coming in the door saying, "I want to buy this car." You say, "Great, I can't finance it." It was a very different problem set.
Yeah, I
In
agree.
2020, it was, I felt guilty about selling Nissan Versas that were used for more than MSRP. I didn't like doing it. It's the market, and the consumers were aware, and everyone's, happy. Like it's a need business.
Eyes wide open at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just because the reality was the new car version equivalent of that just didn't exist. There was no option to buy new. So MSRP, which the S in that has always been suggested, right? I mean, it's the concept of that was an ugly situation for everyone involved, and we weren't making more money. We were selling more expensive cars, or selling less cars for more money and making the same. So our top line revenue was flat, but our bottom line net profit was lower because the cost of collateral increased and the customer was the one really paying for it. And it doesn't even touch the conversation around interest rates. But in this market, cars are depreciating again, which is a good thing. Used cars should depreciate. It's a depreciating asset, and you should be able to catch
The
it.
circle of life.
Right. And you should be able to kind of, just pass it to the consumer in that cycle. And that's where the time and everything comes into play. But, it's same thing when people ask about our position on EVs. And, my kind of cavalier answer is I don't really care. I'm playing hot potato with an asset at the end of the day. I mean, unless I'm getting caught in some of these.
Quick question, just to answer people's question, if they're interested, everybody wants to know what Joel's doing. WWJD, what would Joel do? So Joel,
that's what the J stands for in that? That's weird.
Yeah. No, I like that guy. But if they're thinking about that, are you leaning into the EV used car business, or are you carving it out, or are you somewhere in between?
It's just part of our business. Just like subprime is part of our business. It's just part of our business. That's it.
Thank you.
So what we're seeing an increased percentage of sales, because the reality is new EVs hit a peak at 8.5%, I think, in Q1 of last year, or so whenever it hit that peak of 8.5%.
Yeah, it was down a little bit in Q4, but overall we ended up at about 8.5%. But here's a mind-blowing statistic for everybody that, there is conjecture, people hypothecating on where we're going to be by 2030, just, 6 years from now. And, some people will say, we're going to go from 8% to 15, 18, 20, maybe 30%. The government wanted us to be north of 60%, radically, just incredibly unreasonable. And now they're kind of paring that back. But here's the crazy part. Used cars on the EV side are estimated, and I think this could be conservative, to go up 10 times what it is today. There's 3.5 million used EVs on the road in America today that all have the potential to turn into used cars. If you consider that we sold 1 million new last year, there's nearly 4 times that in pre-owned. So I think it's smart that you are saying, well, It's just another form of a used car asset.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, and there's some question marks around it. Don't get me wrong, but the reality is
How you appraise them is different.
how
Yeah.
you praise them is different. The servicing aspect of it and the reconditioning,
Battery health. Yeah.
battery health, the reporting on that. I mean, who's going to be same thing with the ADAS conversation. I think that can got kicked down the road there. There's still no clarity on who's responsible for verifying their use and accuracy. That's something that kind of keeps me up at night. But I think battery health will be part of that. That's kind of just part of it. If you're not just making it, if you're avoiding those cars, you're missing it. Especially with now that the IRA, the used car tax credit in it, we're leaning into that. That's been great. We're actively trying to find cars that qualify for that meet our criteria. We
Plug.vin. Have you seen Jimmy Douglas's platform? Ex-Tesla executive Jimmy Douglas was in my virtual EV, one of the panels, actually with Brian Kramer. And he has created the first online portal that is EV only used cars, where dealers can go to this portal and buy EVs from this portal, no different than Manheim, but they're all 100% EVs. It's fascinating, and it's early, but it's very, very interesting. So one last question. If you are today talking to a new car franchise dealer, and you were saying, if you do nothing else, if you want to meaningfully, significantly improve the likelihood of having a higher degree of success in your used car business, you must do blank.
You must not treat your used car reconditioning as a profit center. I mean, that's the biggest kind of thing that people get absolutely crushed on. And a lot of dealers even say that they do it, but they don't do it that way. I mean, and we have a franchise point, and even that GM is struggling to kind of get on board with, even like we had a discussion on our check-in a couple of days ago, even MSI, like I'm getting a better rate elsewhere. I don't want to start MSIing my used car somewhere else because we're charging it at consumer rates. So, everything in our ecosystem is built to sell cars, which means my reconditioning facility and our parts allocation and purchasing, the way we FedEx envelopes, all of that, the cost of all of that is covered by the profit of a used car, which means that we're super focused on making those numbers as low as possible. So you have to apply that logic to a used car because there is no fixed barrier. There's no fixed entry point like there is a new car. I mean, car, they just show up on the truck. They cost what they cost. You either sell them or wait for incentives and then sell them. I mean, that's kind of that business. There's a certain ceiling that's inherent to it based on the availability of what the OEM is going to give you. Used cars, you can sell as many or as few as you want based on whatever metrics you want to set. If I could sell 10,000 cars in a month if I wanted to. If I price them wrong, doesn't mean I'm gonna make any money do it, but I can. And you have to apply that same kind of logic to that. So it's amazing to me the kind of constant battle that exists across departments and new car stores. And that's on, if your service manager and used car managers aren't friends, you got to fix that. If your F&I manager and your sales manager aren't friends, you got to fix that. I mean, for me, like I'm lucky enough to have been basically born and bred in a system where those are different departments. Like we don't have an F&I department. We have a manager and a customer, a manager, a salesperson, and a customer. Salesperson's not on commission. Manager gets paid on the entire gross, right? Because why would you separate those two experiences? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
And the same thing comes to our recon process. There is no approval process from a used car manager that's, and the service manager is trying to quote unquote crack their own employee and like colleague on jobs that aren't needed to pass a state inspection, for instance, or meet the criteria that are equivalent to a CPO or whatever your standards are. I mean, that needs to be, that's that kind of DISC conversation. If your service manager isn't getting paid on used car bonuses for sales, you're making a mistake. That's right. When our store hits a sales bonus, a lot of people get paid because they're all there to sell cars, right?
Yeah. They all made a contribution.
Yeah, you cannot silo those things. So if you're doing in-house reconditioning, they have to be on the sales team because that's what they are. They're in sales at that point.
Yeah. I knew without a shadow of a doubt this was going to be a fascinating conversation and I was going to learn a lot. This went so far beyond. I kind of feel like this has to go from a podcast to a mini series because I'm not even close to done with yet in terms of what I would love to learn from you and hear from you. But, perhaps this invitation for dealers to come out and visit you will extend to me as well. And next time I'm out in that area, I would love to visit this massive campus and just get a little bit more opportunity to sit down and learn more about this incredible organization that your father and yourself build and continue to build. And so I want to thank you for giving me your time and for providing the level of just counterintuitive information, incredibly valuable insights, and just your unique perspective, frankly, Joel. So thank you for taking the time to join me. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it too, and I'm humbled to be here. And I thank you for all the
It
kind words.
is such a good time for everybody who's taken the time to listen. I would have to feel incredibly confident that you got as much value out of this as I did. But I want to thank you for investing your time. I take it seriously, and I hope you get a tremendous ROI out of the time you've invested. Please take the time to share this out to anybody and everybody who wants to do more, wants to do better, wants to learn about creating a more effective used car department. Please take the time to share it with them. Please take the time to download it, subscribe, and I love your reviews, whether they're good, bad, or ugly. Doesn't matter. I love them all. And just most of all, thank you for taking the time to join me today on the David Spisak Show. I look forward to seeing you next time and wishing everybody an outstanding day. Thanks so much.